One of the accounts I audited like this, I found out like in 1 month that the ad spend and ad sales for sponsored products, when I did this kind of checking, it was like 70% of ad spend.
Oh, wow.
So then I realized, oh, I need to check this on a regular basis. I thought just looking in the console, like, oh, I'm noticing some of this. Let me pull a report at the end of the month. I can do a thorough investigation. It can be massive, right? And then if you think about the end of the year, your clients are going to have sales goals. What if they miss by 2 or 3%? Maybe if you had caught that issue in like February, you make those sales or you get more subscribers if you have that kind of brand.
Hey everyone, welcome back. I am so stoked to be joined by Joshua Justice. We are going to be talking about branded traffic in ads, and I'm really stoked because Joshua and I were talking before the call. He's got a lot of great insights and a lot of great things that you should be watching out for in your accounts that can really sneak under the radar. So I'm really happy to dig into this topic. But Joshua, I'd love to let you introduce yourself. Tell the people a little bit about what you do.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. So yeah, my name's Josh. I've been working on Amazon since 2013, started my own brand under a mentor that was one of the first people doing the private label thing before it kind of blew up, and have worked for small brands, big brands, a big agency, a small agency, and just really love e-commerce. It's a really fun space and always changing. But then, like we were saying earlier, you could probably walk away from Amazon for a couple of years and the fundamentals will be the same when you get back. So yeah, I love talking about this kind of stuff. I'm always learning. I think as most people are in e-commerce that stick around. So
Yeah, absolutely. All of us are always learning, but you're right. In a way, it's a bit like learning to ride a bike. There's still going to be the fundamentals, and branded traffic, I would say, is one of those fundamentals for sure. It's very sneaky under the radar thing, which we're going to get into. I'm going to let you expand on how you audit this because you were telling me a little bit before we hit record on some of the things you look for, and I was like, oh yeah, we should probably go check that in some of our account things. But yeah, so first I'd love to dig into like defining branded traffic when it comes to ads, because there's a couple things. There was one other one that people might not think about when it comes to branded traffic.
yeah, so I would say you can start with keywords. Obviously, you're going to have your brand keywords. That is the actual name of your brand, but then it might expand. So like when I worked at Nordic Naturals, it's a really well-known supplement brand. And a lot of supplement brands, they might also have other keywords that they've trademarked. So at Nordic Naturals, really well known. They're really well known for the term ultimate omega. And so I was not considering that as branded traffic. Well, we hired an agency and a really good account manager I worked with. Um, so he was just suggesting, like, hey, like, what if we put Ultimate Omega into branded campaigns as well? Because if people type that, they're not looking for any Omegas; they're really looking for your brand. And I totally agreed. I said, that's a great idea. I had thought about it, but I didn't have the bandwidth to like go through all campaigns and change that. So that was one of the changes he made right out the door. You've got things like that, or like when I worked at the Lego Group, you've got, of course, Lego. Then you have Lego plus the different kind of product themes they have. Then there's some that I didn't segment into the branded side that probably could be branded, such as like the Mario starter course. It's like a really, really well-known product. It's been out for a couple years, a really cool product. But if somebody's typing in Mario starter course, they're looking for that Lego set. They're not looking for like a video game or, you know, anything else. So that's like an idea where probably I could have thrown that into branded as well. But again, to do that at scale and be that picky, that one we just kind of left there. So definitely keywords is more the easier one to segment, especially if you're building things out, or maybe you change to another agency, or you just want to scrap your campaign structure and start from scratch. It's easier to do it at the start than try to do it halfway. I think with ASINs, that's like a whole, and I think the biggest thing is like, maybe I don't know if I remember incorrectly or what, but it just was like a few years ago. It just felt like if you ran a campaign where you're targeting ASINs, your ad usually only shows up on that product page. But now it could show up in the search results, but you don't know what keywords are showing up on product campaign. But you could run those same targets in a sponsored brand campaign, and that reporting will actually tell you what keyword led to that ASIN. So look different. ASIN is a really big one, especially when you have a lot of SKUs in your portfolio. I've done a ton of audits over the years, just from working in agency life. And how hire an agency, you want to if you're not in the weeds, you kind of want to check once in a while. And that's where I think you really have to be careful about segmenting branded and unbranded, because it's really easy for your auto campaigns to start getting those branded ASINs trickling in. And let's say you have everything built into your portfolio, like you have your keyword campaigns so on and ASIN campaigns, and they're also segmented by branded and unbranded. You could just look at, you come in Monday morning, you're looking at last week, like, hey, this segment is doing really good. I've got a row as a 4, 5, or 6. Then you open it up, and then maybe all the goodness and love is coming from a few campaigns. You open that up, then you open up, say, 3 campaigns, and then in those campaigns, maybe like 80% of the sales are coming from your own brand that snuck in there. Or maybe it
Yeah.
only got added into that campaign.
Yeah,
So
I mean, I love that. I love to go back and just kind of quickly define when we're talking like traffic, because I think for those of you not listening, maybe not in the weeds, like you have your targets, which would be like the keywords you're bidding on, and you were saying like also the ASINs. Super important. It's easy if you're just like, oh, all these ASINs are converting. I always tell clients like we often name things in a way that makes sense, because like I'm sorry, I don't memorize all the ASINs. I don't think anyone does. I don't care how deep you're in your brand. Like, you're just not gonna know, like, memorize all of your ASINs. Maybe your top 3, but let's be real here. So you have the targets that you know you've put into your ads. You're like, hey, I want to run on this. But what we're talking about is not branded targets. We're talking about branded traffic. So the traffic is the search queries that are triggered through your ads. And if you're running broads, like you were saying you were running autos, if you're running category targeting, all of those things, you can be triggering things that are actually branded. So going back to what you were saying about like, oh my goodness, look at my ROAS, it's fantastic. Well, you would hope if they're searching for your products that you are converting, because let's be honest, they're looking for your product. If you're not converting on your own terms, there's obviously a disconnect. So that's where you can run into some issues. And maybe you can just expand a little bit on like why we need segmentation and why it's so like why that overlap really creates problems.
yeah, so I think understanding too how your brand is doing when you work for a really big brand, like for the Lego group, you go into the toy category, and Lego's usually a top 10, for sure,
Mm-hmm.
top 5. So the search, or like Nordic Naturals during COVID, our brand terms were being searched like top 25. So it's really important to defend the brand
Mm-hmm.
of those, right? For Nordic Naturals, the branding was pretty good, but then there were a lot of other brands where, their packaging looks a little similar, like white and blue.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty basic in the supplement industry. So it's easy for somebody to type that in. They might end up with something else. And with supplements, there's a lot of loyalty, right? So that
Yeah.
the ROAS is lower in supplements.
Well, and especially with a lot of those, when people are searching like supplements, subscribe and saves are huge. So, I
Yeah,
mean, there's
the biggest.
I mean, maybe you can expand a little bit on, we're not saying that there's not validity to branded traffic. It's not that there's not validity to defending your brand, making sure your ASINs are showing up on other ASINs, cross promoting traffic, running to branded pages, like all those things are highly important and should be part of your ad strategy. But maybe you can expand a little bit on why, like what we're saying basically is it's important to keep them separate. You don't want to mix those things and again, kind of start thinking like, oh, your performance is actually better than it is on like your general terms, because again, your brand performance is kind of hiding that.
Yeah, I would say I think the foundational issue is like there's an intent to purchase when someone's searching for your brand. They found your product maybe in Target or Walmart, or maybe just online, or maybe they haven't used your product in a while. So your conversion rate on a branded search term is significantly higher than anything else. Um, so yeah, it's really important to keep those separate, because maybe your ROAS per branded search is like a 10 or 20, 30, but for everything else, it might only be a 2 or 3 if you're in a competitive market. So you don't want to review last week and think you're doing really well. And maybe you did okay, but you want to keep them completely separate. There could be one way I like to use a branded search strategy is you have a new product or new product line, and it's not well known to even your own customers. And when you're on Amazon, depending on the brand you're working at, some might not like to use email marketing to drive traffic to Amazon, or use social media. And so it's just, you can use that to launch your new products and get them up at the top, right? So Maybe there's a new, like with new Lego products, there's new products that are launched all the time. I would want that at the top so that people see what's newest, get those clicks, get those sales, get those reviews, get that organic ranking going. Um, I've done that at every brand I've worked at. You want to get those new products in front of everybody that's doing the branded search or, you know, sponsor products and sponsor brands as well. So I think there's a couple important reasons. The most important though, keeping them separate really gives you an idea of how your brand is doing because branded sales are not going to boost your organic ranking and sales that because someone's already most likely going to buy your product and going to find it in organic. It's like Amazon. I mean, Amazon does pretty well of like if you do a branded search, you're almost always going to find 90, 90 some percent of your results are going to be that brand. So
Yeah, and that's a really great call out. 2 points. One, just that pro tip on like, hey, if you have a well recognized brand, you can actually leverage that for new products, which is a phenomenal resource. Like you've spent that time building up your brand, you might as well leverage it. So I mean that's really important. And so maybe we might also talk about okay, so we know we need them to be separate.
yeah,
Again, great call out. You were talking about market share, and that's really why it's important to keep them separate because you get a better idea of how you're doing on pushing into new markets. Like, again, you've already gained that brand share, but what you're looking to do is like, hey, let's get more. And so, if you are advertising on unbranded, that's how you kind of help get that larger piece of the market. But okay, so we know we need to keep them separate. We know all that stuff needs to happen. But I would love to have you help me expand on like, okay, so then how do you find it? Like maybe you haven't done anything to keep anything separate. It's all together, it's all combined. Like how do you go about now I got to figure out how bad it is.
yeah, yeah. Of course, there's API tools, right? Like some of the software companies now pull this into like what's basically a pivot table, and you can change things and everything. But typically, I like to sometimes just do things old school, just get it in Excel, because maybe there's some errors, right? And the API is not going to catch that. So I like to pull target reports and I like to pull search term reports, and I do like to pull both. Search term reports is great for auditing keywords to see what keywords, making sure that there's no branded leakage into your unbranded campaigns, but also check out are my auto campaigns really getting me long tail keywords, right? Because that's for years, that was like one of the reasons to use auto campaigns no matter what. Like, oh, you're gonna get long-term keywords. But once your account is mature, uh, I've seen it during like Prime Week or like Turkey 5. Your auto campaigns are not gonna actually get you a lot of long tail keywords because you're gonna have a really good foundation of good keywords in a phrase match or a broad match. And hopefully you're bidding more aggressive in like a manual keyword campaign and you're gonna get better long tail keywords out of that than auto. So I like the search term report to check keywords and some ASINs, but the targeting report I think is much better to use if you're trying to look at the ASINs in all your campaigns. Make sure that the bleeding is not over too much. So first, what I do is I start out with a master list of all the brand's ASINs, and whether if you're in Seller Central or Vendor Central, you should be able to pull that catalog as long as you're not deleting the ASIN out of your Seller Central account. If you it shouldn't be a problem. Vendor Central, I would say it's a bit easier. Even when you mark something obsolete, it stays in there for years. But then there's also duplicate ASINs, right? Like if you're not doing a good job of finding duplicate ASINs for your brands and getting them deleted, some of those stragglers are going to be around just hanging out. And then if you have a really big brand, some brands where a lot of products are discontinued or maybe they're licensed out, then it's like your whole world kind of opens up to where it's a massive catalog. And I don't know if this beta is widespread, but there is a report in a lot of people's Amazon in your store. Doesn't matter if you're vendor or seller central. It's called an engagement report. And what it is any product that is attributed, any ASIN that's attributed to your brand, if somebody buys it after visiting your store, gets recorded in that report. And
Interesting. Do you know where to find it?
don't have an account open with me right now.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to remember for things. There's so many reports these days.
Like
Yeah,
you go
sorry.
to the store and then you go to insights and there's a lot of reports. And
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
it's a tab on the left and it's engagement. And then you go back as far in the data as possible. You pull it out, you download it, and this is where it takes time, right? And this is where I think
Mhm.
it's better. they have the ASIN included in the title. They haven't segmented it out. So
Mm,
you have to break up that cell with like a hyphen and isolate that
mm,
ASIN. Suddenly you have another column with all those ASINs in it.
yeah.
To show you also ASINs that are duplicates or, for brands like the Lego, a lot of people will just sell like maybe the minifigures or will sell a bundle. So maybe you'll find it.
Mm, yeah.
Well, you can get this massive ASIN list, and then you pull that targeting report, and you still have cleanup to do. And this is why I
Yeah.
like pulling the manual, or because a lot of times it'll say like in the ASIN field, it'll be like ASIN equals quote
Mhm.
mark, the ASIN in lowercase
Yeah.
quote mark, and you have to get rid of that, and you have to change all those ASINs into uppercase because depending on your
Yeah, because if you're gonna cross-check them, they have to be yeah.
yeah, and so sometimes they'll match, a lot of times they won't. I've done it both ways, and it's really,
Mhm.
really inaccurate. So it takes some work, right? So you gotta pull that report, and then you've got something to compare it to, and everyone's Excel skills are a little different. I just do a VLOOKUP,
Yeah.
to find a match, and then I isolate those, and then you can start seeing like how much of my total ad spend and sales are coming from branded traffic, and sometimes it can be significant. Um, when you have a lot of ASINs, you can't negate everything in your campaigns. Um,
Yeah.
and you can at least go through it and make sure that your manual targets are not doing that. So then like there's more tolerance with the auto campaign because you're not going to be able to
Mm.
do it perfectly. And once you reach
Yeah.
a smell, you might just have to start another campaign. So that's the way that I've done it. Um, I usually try to wait for that 14-day attribution period.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's a good call.
what's different? With the vendor ad console, you need to wait 14 days. With Seller Central, it's 7. Um, an interesting difference. It should be the
Yeah,
same.
it is really interesting, and it's also funny that, like, sponsored products is 7, but sponsored brands and display is 14. So,
Yeah.
like, there's
There's I like running ads for a 3P Seller Central account because you lose the buy box, your ad stops going. With your
mm,
bank
yeah,
account, so you have to manage a lot more as
yeah,
like because
more moving part.
but I know there's a lot of companies out there like helping solve that problem too. So yeah, so it's important to keep it separate. I think one of the accounts I audited like this, I found out like in 1 month that the ad spend and ad sales for sponsored products, when I did this kind of checking, it was like 70% of ad spend for
Oh, wow.
sponsored and
That's significant.
yeah, we're over 80% of ads, sponsored products ad sales with that. So then I realized like, oh, I need to check this on a regular basis because
Mm,
I thought just looking in the console, like, oh, I'm noticing some of this. Let me
mhm.
pull a report at the end of the month. I can do a thorough investigation. It can be massive, right? And then if you think about the end of the year, your clients are going to have sales goals. Well, what if they miss by 2 or 3%? uh,
Mhm.
or 5%. Maybe if you had caught that issue in like February, you make those sales or you get more subscribers if you have that kind of brand.
Interesting. So would you also recommend, like, if you find it significant, maybe doing this analysis, say once a month, once every couple months to at least be able to quantify that it's like how your trends are happening?
I would say it depends on how much you're spending and like the first time you catch it, you should be able to stop a lot of it. But then if you're using maybe some kind of ad tech where you're constantly uh, mining for new targets and you have a system where it's constantly adding, I would do it at least once a month. And really, like within 6 months, it should be pretty tidied up. And by then, you should also be good at the manual process as well. Uh,
Yeah.
and to just double check. So,
Yeah, when you're correcting for that, I assume that's just kind of well, you've amassed your master list of ASINs at that point. Again, doing that. Again, the benefit of doing it manually is like you should have the targets that you're cross-checking, and so you probably can start using those as negative keywords and say your ad account. Is that how you would when you say correct for that? Is that kind of how you go about it?
yeah. Yeah. And some of the newer software, you can look at it by date range and can kind of do the same thing. I still prefer to just pull it out of the console because I've used software and sometimes it doesn't always seem 100%. And I think like depending on the tool you're using, sometimes if you're if you have a massive account with a lot of ASINs, like maybe their negation automation system within it, it could just be too much for you to handle. Whereas if once you learn bulk uploads, as we've talked to flag those.
Cool. So then how would you recommend, like we're saying, okay, keep it separate. We're like auditing. Great. Okay. So we know we have a problem. All right. So we got to use our negatives to fix it. Like going forward, obviously, like we were saying, audit it periodically or just kind of have an idea of what's going on. How would you recommend, just kind of like making sure it doesn't snowball like that again?
I would say just regularly checking. I think the mistake I've made before is I found it in the console, didn't think it was a big deal, and then I found it, fixed it, thought I fixed it, or really in one case, somebody else had fixed it, but then I didn't double check for like 3 or 4 months, and I realized, oh, it was only partially fixed, like maybe three-quarters of the way. So I would say you have to follow up on yourself or whoever's doing it to just consistently check it to make sure that's not happening again. Um, really want to have it segmented. It helps you spend wiser. In that case for that account, the branded spend was significantly higher than I had anticipated. And so, you're not really contributing much to your organic rankings and you're not really adding a lot
Yeah.
of sales to the company if, 30-40% of your ad spend is branded and you thought
Hmm.
you were spending 10%. Um,
Right.
so I
Well, so you
think it's
said overall, brand and spend obviously beneficial, like defend your brand, use it to launch. But yeah, you're saying if you're the significant portions, you're right, won't add to market share.
yeah, and I think it's also important to have goals for that for your budget, right? Like set a limit
Hmm.
how much you're gonna spend on branded. Like when I did brand defense for supplements, it was a lot more expensive than any other brand
Hmm.
because people
Yeah.
are really aggressive because they're gonna go after your brand. And I remember trying to go after other branded search. It's like worse than a generic keyword because
Yes.
what it depends on the size of the account. You can just set all your bids to $5 or $10 and not worry about it. But once your brand starts being searched more and more,
Hmm.
it's not the bids that cost so much, it's the sheer volume of it. So you
Yeah.
can play your maximum bids like 30 cents and spend 50 grand a day if your brand is being searched a million times a day. Um, and someone's gonna cut
Yeah.
you ad before they click on organic. Uh,
It's a good thing to watch out for. And like you said, if you have a specific budget, kind of, maybe it's easier to go ahead and kind of determine maybe how much you should be spending for branded and then just allocate that if you're a larger brand.
yeah, and I think I think it holds true for just all of life, right? If you have a budget
Hmm.
here to it, it's really easy to make changes. So if your branded budget is 20%, then it's like, okay, I'm hitting that. Well, where can I pull back? Well, then I have a priority list. Right?
Hmm.
So, okay, for branded search, if I need to cut that budget in half, well, let me just focus on the newest products to get in front or the ones that are kind of struggling the most. Let me put that out in front of people like this piece count for this supplement brand or this product that is, we're going to discontinue in 6 months. We got to get rid of it. Let's,
Hmm.
let's bump it to the top. So
Cool. Well, I love it. This has been super awesome. It's been awesome chatting with you. For everyone kind of interested in getting it, like just getting in touch with you possibly, because you again do in-house management. Maybe they need somebody for that.
yeah,
What's the best place for someone to reach out to you?
yeah, definitely just on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn most days during the week, and I've made a lot of friends like you and so many others just chatting about e-commerce and all things Amazon. So
Well, awesome. It's been a pleasure, and I'm sure the audience has learned a lot when it comes to branded and how you should treat that in ads.
awesome. Thank you.